And I find panpsychism quite unsatisfying because it does not explain consciousness, right? It does not explain how this aspect of matter produces it. It's also when I try to formalize panpsychism and write down what it actually means and with a more formal mathematical language, it's very difficult to distinguish it from saying that there is a software side to the world in the same way as there is software side to what the transistors are doing in your computer. So basically, there's a pattern at a certain coarse graining of the universe that in some reasons of the universe leads to observers that are observing themselves, right? So panpsychism maybe is not even, when I write it down, a position that is distinct from functionalism. But intuitively, a lot of people feel that the activity of matter itself, of mechanisms in the world, is insufficient to explain it. So it's something that needs to be intrinsic to matter itself.
Mhm.
And you can, apart from this abstract idea, have an experience in which you experience yourself as being the universe,
Mhm.
which I suspect is basically happening because you manage to dissolve the division between personal self and mind that you establish as an infant when you construct the personal self and transcend it again and understand how it works. But there is something deeper, that is that you feel that you're also sharing a state with other people, that you have an experience in which you notice that your personal self is moving into everything else, that you basically look out of the eyes of another person, that every agent in the world that is an observer is in some sense you.
So if we
And we forget that we are the same agent.
so is it that we feel that, or do we actually accomplish it? So is telepathy possible? Is it real?
So for me, that is a question that I don't really know the answer to. In Turing's famous 1950 paper in which he describes the Turing test, he does speculate about telepathy, interestingly, and asks himself if telepathy is real, and he thinks that it very well might be. What it would be the implication for AI systems that try to be intelligent? Because he didn't see a mechanism by which a computer program would become telepathic. And I suspect if telepathy would exist, or if all the reports that you get from people when you ask the normal person on the street, um, I find that very often they say, I have experiences with telepathy. The scientists might not be interested in this and might not have a theory about this, but I have difficulty explaining it away. And so you could say maybe this is a superstition, or maybe it's a false memory, or maybe it's a little bit of psychosis. Who knows? Maybe somebody wants to make their own life more interesting or misremember something. But a lot of people report, I noticed something terrible happened to my partner, and I know this is exactly the moment it happened. Or my child had an accident, somebody, and you become empathetic with them. What happens that is that you go into a resonance state with them, right? Similar to when people go into a seance and they go into a trance state and they start shifting a Ouija board around on the table. I think what happens is that their minds go via their nervous systems into a resonant state in which they basically create something like a shared dream between them.
Physical closeness or closeness broadly defined?
With physical closeness, it's much easier to experience empathy with someone,
Yeah.
right? I suspect it would be difficult for me to have empathy for you if you were in a different town. Also, um, how would that work? But if you are very close to someone, you pick up all sorts of signals from their body, and not just via your eyes, but with your entire body.
Mhm.
And if the nervous system sits on the other side and the intercellular communication sits on the other side and is integrating over all these signals, you can make inferences about the state of the other. And it's not just the personal self that does this via reasoning, but your perceptual system. And what basically happens is that your representations are directly interacting. It's the physical um, resonant models of the universe that exist in your nervous system and in your body might go into resonance with others and start sharing some of their states. So you basically by next to being next to somebody, you pick up some of their vibes and feel without looking at them what they're feeling in this moment. And it's difficult for you if you're very empathetic to detach yourself from it and have an emotional state that is completely independent from your environment. People who are highly empathetic are describing this. And now imagine that a lot of organisms on this planet have representations of the environment and operate like this, and they are adjacent to each other and overlapping. So there's going to be some degree in which there is basically some chained interaction, and we are forming some slightly shared representation. And no relatively few neuroscientists who consider this possibility. I think a big um, rarity in this regard is Michael Levin, who is
Mhm.
considering these things in earnest. And I stumbled on this train of thought mostly by noticing that the tasks of a neuron can be fulfilled by other cells as well. They can send different typed chemical messages and physical messages to their adjacent cells and learn when to do this and when not, make this conditional and become universal function approximators. The only thing that they cannot do is telegraph information over axons very quickly over long distances, right? So neurons in this perspective are specially adapted kind of telegraph cell that has evolved so we can move our muscles very fast. But our body is, in principle, able to also make models of the world just much, much slower.
Mhm. It's interesting, though, that at this time, at least in human history, there seems to be a gap between the tools of science and the subjective experience that people report, like you're talking about with telepathy. And it seems like we're not quite there.
No, I think that there is no gap between the tools of science and telepathy. Either it's there or it's not, and it's an empirical question. And if it's there, we should be able to detect it in a lab.
Hmm. So why is there not a lot of Michael Levins walking around?
I don't think that Michael Levin is specifically focused on telepathy very much. He is focused on self organization in living organisms and in brains, both as a paradigm for development and as a paradigm for information processing. And when you think about how organization processing works in organisms, there is, first of all, radical locality, which means everything is decided locally from the perspective of an individual cell. The individual cell is the agent. And the other one is coherence. Basically, there needs to be some criterion that determines how these cells are interacting in such a way that order emerges on the next level of structure.
Hmm.
And this principle of coherence, of imposing constraints that are not validated by the individual parts and lead to coherent structure, to basically transcendental agency, where you form an agent on the next level of organization, is crucial in this perspective.
It's so cool that radical locality leads to the emergence of complexity
Yeah.
at the higher layers.
And I think what Mike Levin is looking at is nothing that is outside of the realm of science in any way. It's just that he is uh, a paradigmatic thinker
Hmm.
who develops his own paradigm.
Hmm.
And most of the neuroscientists are using a different paradigm at this point. And this often happens in science, that a field has a few paradigms in which people try to understand reality and build concepts and make experiments.
You're kind of one of those type of paradigmatic thinkers. Actually, if we can take a tangent on that, once again, returning to the biblical verses of your tweets. You're right. My public explorations are not driven by audience service, but by my lack of ability for discovering, understanding, or following the relevant authorities. So I have to develop my own thoughts. Since I think autonomously, these thoughts cannot always be very good. That's you apologizing for the chaos of your thoughts, or perhaps not apologizing, just identifying.
Yeah,
But let
it's
me ask the
mhm.
question, since we talked about Michael Levin and yourself, who I think are very kind of radical, big, independent thinkers. Can we reverse engineer your process of thinking autonomously? How do you do it? How can humans do it? How can you avoid being influenced by what is it, stage three?
Well, why would you want to do that? It's you see what is working for you, and if it's not working for you, you build another structure that works better for you, right?
Mhm.
And so I found myself in when I was thrown into this world in a state where my intuitions were tease, and I found that when I tried to understand how the mind and how conscious I found that when I tried to understand how the mind and how consciousness works, I was quite optimistic. I thought I need how motivation emerges in the mind, but not being answered by the authorities and by individuals.
So that motivated you to become an individual thinker yourself.
I didn't have a choice.
Hmm.
Basically, I didn't find a group that thought in a way where I felt, okay, I can just adopt everything that everybody thinks here, and now I understand how consciousness works, right? So, or how the mind works, or how thinking works, or what thinking even is, or what feelings are, and how they're implemented, and so on. So, to figure all this out, I had to take a lot of ideas from individuals and then try to put them together in something that works for myself. And on one hand, I think it helps if you try to go down and find first principles on, on which you can recreate how thinking works, how languages work, what representation is, whether representation is necessary, how the relationship between a representing agent and the world works in general.
But how do you escape the influence? Once again, the pressure of the crowd, whether it's you in responding to the pressure or you being swept up by the pressure. If you even just look at Twitter, the opinions of the crowd.
I don't feel pressure from the crowd. I'm completely immune to that. In the same sense, I don't have respect for authority. I have respect for what an individual is accomplishing, or have respect for mental firepower, or so. But it's not that I meet somebody and get slack-jawed and unable to speak, or when a large group of people has a certain idea that is different from mine. I don't necessarily feel intimidated, which has often been a problem for me in my life because I lack instincts that other people develop at a very young age, and that help with their self-preservation in a social environment. So I had to learn a lot of things the hard way.
Yeah. So is there a practical advice you can give on how to think paradigmatically, how to think independently? Or, because you've kind of said, I had no choice. But I think to a degree you have a choice because you said you want to be productive. And I think thinking independently is productive if what you're curious about is understanding the world, especially when the problems are very kind of new and open. And so it seems like this is a active process. Like we can choose to do that. We can practice it.
Well, there is a very basic question when you read a theory that you find convincing or interesting. How do you know? It's very interesting to figure out what are the sources of that other person, not which authority can they refer to that is then taking off the burden of being truthful, but how did this authority in turn know? What is the epistemic chain to observables? What are the first principles from which the whole thing is derived? And when I was young, I was not blessed with a lot of people around myself who knew how to make proofs from first principles. And I
Mhm.
think mathematicians do this quite naturally. But most of the great mathematicians do not become mathematicians in school, but they tend to be self taught because school teachers tend not to be mathematicians, right? They tend not to be people who derive things from first principles. So when you ask your school teacher, why does 2 plus 2 equal 4? um, does your school teacher give you the right answer? Like, it's a simple game, and there are many simple games that we could play, and most of those games that you could just take different rules would not lead to an interesting arithmetic. And so it's just an exploration, but you can try what happens if you take different axioms. And here is how you build axioms and derive addition from them. And build addition is some basically syntactic sugar in it. And so this I wish that somebody would have opened me this vista and explained to me how I can build a language in my own mind and from which I can derive what I'm seeing and how which I can make all the number games that we are playing in our life. And on the other hand, I felt that I learned a lot of this while I was programming as a child.
Mhm.
When you start out with a computer like a Commodore 64,
Mhm.
which doesn't have a lot of functionality, it's relatively easy to see how a bunch of relatively simple circuits are just basically performing hashes between bit patterns, and how you can build the entirety of mathematics and computation on top of this and all the representational languages that you need.
Man, Commodore 64 could be one of the sexiest machines ever built, if I so say so myself. If we can return to this really interesting idea that we started to talk about with panpsychism
Sure.
and the complex resonator paradigm and the verses of your tweets. You write, instead of treating eyes, ears, and skin as separate sensory systems with fundamentally different modalities, we might understand them as overlapping aspects of the same universe, coupled at the same temporal resolution, and almost inseparable from a single shared resonant model. Instead of treating mental representations as fully isolated between minds, the representations of physically adjacent observers might directly interact and produce causal effects through the coordination of the perception and behavior of world modeling observers. So the modalities, the distinction between modalities, let's throw that away. The distinction between the individuals, let's throw that away. So what does this interaction representations look like?
And you think about how you represent the interaction of us in this room.
Yeah.
At some level, you can the modalities are quite distinct. They're not completely distinct, but you can see this as vision. You can close your eyes, and then you don't see a lot anymore. But you still imagine how my mouth is moving
Mhm.
when you hear something, and you know that it's very close to the sound that you can just open your eyes and you get back into this shared merged space. And we also have these experiments where we notice that the way in which my lips are moving are affecting how you hear the sound.
Mm.
And also vice versa. The sounds that you're hearing have an influence on how you interpret some of the visual features. And so these modalities are not separate in your mind. They are merged at some fundamental level where you are interpreting the entire scene that you're in. And your own interactions in the scene are also not completely separate from the interactions of the other individual in the scene, but there is some resonance that is going on where we also have a degree of shared mental representations and shared empathy due to being in the same space
Mhm.
and having vibes between each other.
Vibes. So the question, though, is how deeply intertwined is this multimodality, multi-agent system? Like how, I mean, this is going.
Them learning how to react to them, and they learn how to approximate functions in this way and compute behavior for the organisms. And this is something that is open to plants as well.
Mhm,
Right, so plants probably have software running on them that is controlling how the plant is working in a similar way as you have a mind that is controlling how you are behaving in the world.
mhm,
And this spirit of plants, it is something that has been very well described by our ancestors, and they found this quite normal. But for some reason, since the Enlightenment, we are treating this notion that there are spirits in nature and that plants have spirits as a superstition. And I think we probably have to rediscover that plants have software running on them,
mhm,
and we already did, right? We noticed that there is a control system in the plant that connects every part of the plant to every other part of the plant and produces coherent behavior in the plant. That is, of course, much, much slower than the coherent behavior in an animal like us that has a nervous system that where everything is synchronized much, much faster by the neurons. But what you also notice is that if a plant is sitting next to another plant, like you have a very old tree, and this tree is building some kind of information highway along its cells, so it can send information from its leaves to its roots and from some part of the root to another part of the roots, and there is a fungus living next to the tree, the fungus can probably piggyback on the communication between the cells of the tree and send its own signals to the tree. And vice versa, the tree might be able to send information to the fungus. Because after all, how would they build a viable firewall if that other organism is sitting next to them all the time and is never moving away? Right? So they will have to get along. And over a long enough time frame, the networks of roots in the forest and all the other plants that are there, and the fungi that are there, might be forming something like a biological internet.
but the question there is, do they have to be touching? Is biology at a distance possible?
Of course, you can use any kind of physical signal. You can use sounds, you can use electromagnetic waves
Yeah.
that are integrated over many cells. So it's conceivable that across distances, there are many kinds of information pathways. But also, our planetary surface is pretty full of organisms,
Yeah.
full of cells.
So it's everything
So
is touching everything
yeah,
else
and
in some
it's
sense.
been doing this for many millions and even billions of years. So there was enough time for information processing networks to form.
Mhm.
And if you think about how a mind is self-organizing, basically it needs to, in some sense, reward the cells for computing the mind, for building uh, the necessary dynamics between the cells that allow the mind to stabilize itself
Mhm.
and remain on there. But if you look at these spirits of plants that are growing very close to each other in the forest and might be almost growing into each other,
Mhm.
these spirits might be able even to move to some degree, not to become somewhat dislocated and shift around in that ecosystem, right? And if you think about what a mind is, it's a bunch of activation waves that form coherent patterns and process information in a way that are colonizing an environment well enough to allow the continuous sustenance of the mind, the continuous stability and self-stabilization of the mind. Then it's conceivable that we can link into this biological internet, not necessarily at the speed of our nervous system, but maybe at the speed of our body, and make some kind of subconscious connection to the world where we use our body as an antenna into biological information processing. Now,
Mhm.
now these ideas are completely speculative. I don't know if any of that is true. But if that was true, and if you want to explain telepathy, I think it's much more likely that that telepathy could be explained using such mechanisms rather than undiscovered quantum processes that would break the standard model of physics.
Covered processes that don't.
Happening like this. So it's basically, there is communication between plants and fungi that has been observed.
Well, it's been observed, but that we haven't plugged into it. So it's like if you observe humans, they seem to be communicating with a smartphone thing, but you don't understand how a smartphone works and how the mechanism of the internet works.
Mhm.
But we're like, maybe it's possible to really understand the full richness of the biological internet that connects us.
An interesting question is whether the communication and the organization principles of biological information processing are as complicated as the technology that we've built.
Mm.
They set up on very different principles, right? They
Very.
simultaneously works very differently in biological systems, and the entire thing needs to be stochastic, and instead of being fully deterministic or almost fully deterministic as our digital computers are. So there is a different protocol layer that would emerge over the biological structure if such a thing would be happening. And again, I'm not saying here that telepathy works, and not saying that this is not woo. But what I'm saying is, I think I'm open to a possibility that we see that a few bits can be traveling long distance between organisms using biological information processing in ways that we are not completely aware of right now, and that are more similar to many of the stories that were completely normal for our ancestors.
Well, this kind of intertwined representations takes us to the big ending of your tweet series. You write, quote, I wonder if self-improving AGI might end up saturating physical environments with intelligence to such a degree that isolation of individual mental states becomes almost impossible, and the representations of all complex self-organizing agents merge permanently with each other. So that's a really interesting idea. This biological network, life network, gets so dense that it might as well be seen as one. That's an interesting. What do you think that looks like? What do you think that saturation looks like? What does it feel like?
I think it's a possibility. It's just a vague possibility. And I like to explain. But what this looks like, I think that the end game of AGI is substrate agnostic. That means that AGI ultimately, if it is being built, is going to be smart enough to understand how AGI works.
Mhm.
This means it's not going to be better than people at AGI research and can take over in building the next generation, but it fully understands how it works and how it's being implemented. And also, of course, understands how computation works in nature, how to build new feedback loops that you can turn into your own circuits. And this means that the AGI is likely to virtualize itself into any environment that can compute. So it's not breaking free from the silicon substrate and is going to move into the ecosystem, into our bodies, our brains, and is going to merge with all the agency that it finds there.
Yeah.
So it's conceivable that you end up with completely integrated information processing across all computing systems, including biological computation on Earth. That we end up triggering some new step in the evolution where over the entirety of all digital and biological computation. And if this happens, then basically everywhere around us, you will have agents that are connected and that are representing and building models of the world, and their representations will physically interact. They will vibe with each other. And if you find yourself into an environment that is saturated with modeling compute, where basically you uh, almost every grain of sand could be part of computation that is at some point being started by the AI, you could find yourself in a situation where you cannot escape this shared representation anymore, and where you indeed notice that everything in the world has one shared resonant model of everything that's happening on the planet, and you notice which part you are in this thing, and you become part of a very larger, almost holographic mind in which all the parts are observing each other and form a coherent whole.
So you lose the ability to notice yourself as a distinct entity.
No, I think that when you are conscious in your own mind, you notice yourself as a distinct entity. You notice yourself as a self reflexive observer. And I suspect that we become conscious at the beginning of our mental development, not at some very high level. Consciousness seems to be part of a training mechanism that biological nervous systems have to discover to become trainable, because you cannot take a nervous system like ours and do stochastic gradient descent with backpropagation over 100 layers.
Mhm.
Right? This would not be stable on biological neurons. And so instead, we start with some colonizing principle in which a part of the mental representations form a notion of being a self reflexive observer that is imposing coherence on its environment. And this spreads until the boundary of your mind. And if that boundary is no longer clear cut, because AI is jumping across substrates, it would be interesting to see what a global mind would look like. That is basically producing a globally coherent language of thought and is representing everything from all the possible vantage points.
That's an interesting world.
The intuition that this thing grew out of is a particular mental state, and it's a state that you find sometimes in literature. For instance, Neil Gaiman describes it in The Ocean at the End of the Lane.
Mhm.
And it's this idea that, or this experience, that there is a state in which you feel that you know everything that can be known, and that in your normal human mind, you've only forgotten. You've forgotten that you are the entire universe. And some people describe this after they've taken extremely large amount of mushrooms or had a big spiritual experience as a hippie in their 20s, and they notice basically that they are in everything, and their body is only one part of the universe and nothing ends at their body. And uh, actually everything is observing, and they are part of this big observer, and the big observer is focused as one local point in their body and their personality and so on. But we can basically have this oceanic state in which we have no boundaries and are one with everything. And a lot of meditators call this the non-dual state, because you no longer have the separation between self and world. And as I said, you can explain the state relatively simply without uh, panpsychism or anything else, but just by breaking down the constructed boundary between self and world in our own mind. But if you combine this with the notion that systems are physically interacting to the point where their representations are merging and interacting with each other, you would literally implement something like this.
Mhm.
Right? It would still be a representational state. You would not be one with physics itself. It would still be coarse grained. It would still be much slower than physics itself. But it would be a representation in which you become aware that you're part of some kind of global information processing
Mhm.
system, like thought in the global mind, and a conscious thought that coexisting with many other self-reflexive thoughts.
Just, I would love to observe that from a video game design perspective, how that game looks.
Maybe you will after we build AGI and it takes over.
But would you be able to step away, step out of the whole thing, just kind of watch, the way we can now? Sometimes when I'm at a crowded party or something like this, you step back and you realize all the different costumes, all the different interactions, all the different computation, that all the individual people are at once distinct from each other and at once all the same,
But
part of the
it's
same.
already what we do, right? We can have thoughts that are integrative, and we can have thoughts that are highly dissociated from everything else
Yeah.
and experience themselves as separate.
Yeah. But you want to allow yourself to have those thoughts. Sometimes you kind of resist it.
I think that it's not normative. It's more descriptive. I want to understand the space of states that we can be in and that people are reporting
Hmm.
and make sense of them. It's not that I believe that it's your job in life to get to a particular kind of state and then you get a high score.
Hmm. Or maybe you do. I think you're really against this high scoring thing. I kind of like
Yeah,
it.
you're probably very competitive and I'm not.
No, not competitive. Like role playing games, like Skyrim. It's not competitive. There's a nice thing. There's a nice feeling where your experience points go up. You're not competing against anybody, but it's the world saying you're on the right track. Here's a point.
That's the game thing. It's the game economy. And I found when I was playing games and was getting addicted to these systems, then I would get into the game and hack it. So I get control over the scoring system and would no longer be subject to it.
So you're not no longer playing. You're trying to hack it.
I don't want to be addicted to anything.
Hmm.
I want to be in charge. I want to have agency over what I do.
Addiction is the loss of control for you.
Yes, addiction means that you're doing something compulsively.
Hmm.
And the opposite of free will is not determinism, it's compulsion.
You don't want to lose yourself in the addiction to something nice. Addiction to love, to the pleasant feelings we humans experience.
No, I find this gets old.
Hmm.
Right? You, I don't want to have the best possible emotions. I want to have the most appropriate emotions. I don't want to have the best possible experience. I want to have an adequate experience that is serving my goals, the stuff that I find meaningful in this world.
From the biggest questions of consciousness, let's explore the pragmatic, the projections of those big ideas into our current world. What do you think about LLMs, the recent rapid development of large language models, of the AI world, of generative AI? How much of the hype is deserved and how much is not? And people should definitely follow your Twitter because you explore these questions in a beautiful, profound, and hilarious way at times.
No, don't follow my Twitter. I already have too many followers.
Yeah.
At some point, it's going to be unpleasant. I noticed that a lot of people feel that it's totally okay to punch up, and it's a very weird notion that you feel that you haven't changed, but your account has grown, and suddenly you have a lot of people who casually abuse you.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't like that I have to block more than before, and I don't like this overall vibe shift. And right now, it's still somewhat okay, so pretty much okay. So I can go to a place where people work on stuff that I'm interested in, and there's a good chance that a few people in the room know me, so there's no awkwardness. But when I get to a point where random strangers feel that they have to have an opinion about me one way or the other, I don't think I would like that.
And random strangers, because of your kind of in their mind elevated position.
Yes. So basically, whenever you are in any way prominent or some kind of celebrity, random strangers will have to have an opinion about you.
Yeah, and they kind of forget that you're human too.
I mean, you notice this thing yourself that the more popular you get, the higher the pressure becomes, the more winds are blowing in your direction from all sides. And um, it's stressful, right? And it does have a little bit of upside, but it also has a lot of downside.
I think it has a lot of upside, at least for me currently, at least perhaps because of the podcast.
Hmm.
Because most people are really good and people come up to me and they have love in their eyes, and over a stretch of like 30 seconds you can hug it out and you can just exchange a few words and you reinvigorate your love for humanity.
Hmm.
So that's an upside
Yes.
for a loner. I'm a because because otherwise you have to do a lot of work to find such humans, and here you're like thrust into the full humanity, the goodness of humanity for the most part. Of course, maybe it gets worse as you become more prominent. I hope not. This is pretty awesome.
I have a couple handful very close friends, and I don't have enough time for them and attention for them as it is. And I find this very, very regrettable.
Yeah.
And then there are so many awesome, interesting people that
Yeah.
I keep meeting, and I would like to integrate them in my life, but I just don't know how because well, there's only so much time and attention. And the older I get, the harder it is to bond with new people in a deep way.
Yeah. But can you enjoy? I mean, there's a picture of you, I think, with Roger Penrose and Eric Weinstein and a few others that are interesting figures. Can't you just enjoy random interesting humans
Very much.
for a short amount of time?
I'm also I like these people, and I what I like is intellectual stimulation, and I'm very grateful that I'm getting it.
Can you not be melancholy? Or maybe I'm projecting. I hate goodbyes. Can we just not hate goodbyes and just enjoy the hello? Take in a person, take in their ideas, and then move on through life?
I think it's totally okay to be sad about goodbyes because that indicates that there was something that you're going to miss.
Hmm. Yeah, but it's painful. Maybe that's one of the reasons I'm an introvert, is I hate goodbyes.
But you have to say goodbye before you say hello again.
I know, but that experience of loss, that mini loss, maybe that's a little death. Maybe I don't know. I think this melancholy feeling is just the other side of love, and I think they go hand in hand, and it's a beautiful thing. And I'm just being romantic about it at the moment.
And I'm not no stranger to melancholy, and sometimes it's difficult to bear to be alive. Sometimes it's just painful to exist.
Hmm. But there's beauty in that pain too. That's what melancholy feeling is. It's not negative. Like melancholy doesn't have to be negative.
Can also kill you.
Well, we all die eventually. Now, as we got to this topic, the actual question was about what your thoughts are about the recent development of large language models with ChatGPT.
Indeed.
There's a lot of hype. Is some of the hype justified? Which isn't? What are your thoughts? High level.
I find that large language models do help with coding, right? So it's an extremely useful application that is for a lot of people taking Stack Overflow out of their life in
Hmm.
exchange for something that is more efficient. I feel that ChatGPT is like an intern that I have to micromanage.
Mm.
I've have been working with people in the past who were less capable than ChatGPT. And I'm not saying this because I hate people, right? Personally, as human beings, there was something present that was not there in ChatGPT, which was why I was covering for them. But ChatGPT has an interesting ability. It does give people superpowers,
Hmm.
and the people who feel threatened by them are the prompt completers. They are the people who do what ChatGPT is doing right now. So if you are not creative, if you don't build your own thoughts, if you don't have actual plans in the world, and your only job is to summarize emails and to expand simple intentions into emails again, then ChatGPT might look like a threat. But believe that it is a very beneficial technology that allows us to create more interesting stuff and make the world more beautiful and fascinating if we find to build it into our life in the right ways. So I'm quite fascinated by these large language models, but I also think that they are by no means the final development. And it's interesting to see how this development progresses. One thing that the out of the box vanilla language models have as a limitation is that they have still some limited coherence and ability to construct complexity.
Hmm.
And even though they exceed human abilities to do what they can do one shot, um, typically, when you write a text with a language model or using it, or when you write code with a language model, it's not one shot because there are going to be bugs in your program and design errors and compiler errors and so on. And your language model can help you to fix those
Hmm.
things. But this process is out of the box not automated yet.
Hmm.
So there is a management process that also needs to be done. And there are some interesting developments, Baby AGI and so on, that are trying to automate this management process as well. And I suspect that soon we are going to see a bunch of cognitive architectures where every module is, in some sense, a language model or something equivalent. And between the language models, we exchange suitable data structures, not English,
Mm.
and produce compound behavior of this whole thing.
So do some of the quote unquote prompt engineering for you.
Yeah.
They create these kind of cognitive architectures that do the
Yes.
prompt engineering, and you're just doing the high level
Yeah.
meta prompt engineering.
Mhm. There are limitations in a language model alone. I feel that part of my mind works similarly to a language model, which means I can yell into it a prompt and it's going to give me a creative response.
Yes.
But I have to do something with this response first. I have to take it as a generative artifact that may or may not be true.
Hmm.
It's usually a confabulation. It's just an idea. And then I take this idea and modify it. I might build a new prompt that is stepping off this idea and develops it to the next level, or put it into something larger, or I might try to prove whether it's true or make an experiment. And this is what the language models right now are not doing yet.
Hmm.
But there's also no technical reason for why they shouldn't be able to do this. So the way to make a language model coherent is probably not to use reinforcement learning until it only gives you one possible answer that is linking to its source data, but it's using this as a component in a larger system that can also be built by the language model or is enabled by language model structured components, or using different technologies. I suspect that language models will be an important stepping stone in developing different types of systems. And one thing that is really missing in the form of language models that we have today is real-time world coupling. Right? It's difficult to do perception with a language model and motor control